Hello, my name is Megan McMahon, and I will be presenting on examining factors underlying the Women's Peace and Security Index rankings. So many of us know that gender inequality is a large problem around the world. However, you may not know that gender inequality varies by country around the world, and researchers are working hard to uncover the complex layers underlying these disparities between countries. For example, Georgetown University's Institute for Women, Peace and Security, otherwise known as WPS, produces research on women's safety and peace worldwide, while also publishing a yearly index ranking for countries by WPS score. This score represents women's overall sense of peace and safety, and it ranges from 0.0 to 1.0 on the index. The dimensions measured include justice, inclusion, and security. While each of these dimensions may provide risks or benefits to women in the countries, we wanted to dig deeper and explore the magnitude of these effects and target more specifically what factors affect this annual ranking. So first, we're going to explore the background and literature review on this subject. Most of the research currently conducted on the WPS index has focused on specific issues or focused on one country. So here are two examples of studies that do so. The first one, they looked at factors of low-ranking sub-Saharan African countries on the WPS scale. From this study, they discovered these countries were ranked low due to early marriages, threats to physical safety, and an absence of legal identification for women. A second study looked at many countries, however, it focused on one issue, that being COVID-19 risks. Researchers found countries with decreased access to healthcare and a high risk of being overwhelmed by the pandemic were the ones that had the lower scores on the WPS index. While the studies on the previous slide are certainly informative, a gap in the literature still exists. No recent research has assessed and identified the predictive factors of the 2021 WPS rankings. We believe that by doing so, we can fill this gap and identify such factors. Therefore, the aim of our research is to explore the factors that underlie these rankings and determine which are significant. This will also help us apply these in real-world application. This leads us to our hypothesis. We hypothesize that a country's financial inclusion, education, employment, and GDP per capita would significantly impact WPS rankings. In other words, we believe these four factors could impact women's sense of safety and security around the world. Now let's have a look at our method for the study. So looking at our sample, our data was drawn from the 2021 Women's Peace and Security Index based on 170 nations, and this covers 99% of the world's population. In terms of measures, participants from the survey were surveyed based on three dimensions: justice, inclusion, and security. Each of these dimensions has their own specific variables, as you can see in the table below. Here are the results of our statistical analyses. From this first graph, we can see that WPS scores were associated with the nation's gross domestic product per capita. However, it's not in an exact linear relation. Rather, the WPS index ranged from high to low scores for lower income nations, but was never low for middle and higher income nations. These findings suggest that although there is an apparent positive association between a country's GDP per capita and their WPS index rankings, other nations can still have a high ranking without the high GDP per capita. We also ran a cluster analysis. So what this did was take all the countries and divide them up by the 11 indices as well as GDP per capita. So 170 nations were divided into 5 clusters by the end of the cluster analysis. These groups are divided by similarity on the indices, and as we can see, these 5 different groups vary drastically in the amount of countries featured in them, as well as which countries are in them. We also ran a factor analysis on the data, and this reduced our 11 variables to only 2 dimensions. On the bottom, we see factor 1, that is chiefly made up of finances. On the side, we see factor 2, and that is made up of education and employment. So, when we crossed this with the 5 clusters, we came up with this graph. What this graph shows us is where each cluster of countries falls between education and employment and finance. So we can see group 1 up in the top right corner dominates in both areas, while other groups such as 5 is low on education but considerably high in finance, and 3 is high in education but considerably low in finance. We also have 3 interesting additional findings. The first is an absence of legal discrimination. This absence was higher in groups such as 1 and 2. The second finding was about discriminatory norms. Discriminatory norms were found to be highest in groups 4 and 5 of the country clusters. And finally, for intimate partner violence, the same results were found as discriminatory norms. Groups 4 and 5 had the highest rates. Now let's discuss why these results are important. From our results, 3 main points arise. The first one is that GDP per capita has a curvilinear relationship with the WPS index. So basically what this means is women in countries with a lower GDP per capita can still maintain a good quality of life and feel a sense of safety. The second point was shown from our cluster analysis. This demonstrated the importance of 2 WPS dimensions, which were justice and inclusion. More specifically, we see the most significant factors behind the WPS rankings include education and employment and financial inclusion. Additionally, findings demonstrated certain risk factors that negatively impacted the WPS ranking, and these were intimate partner violence, legal discrimination, and discriminatory norms. In summary, why is this information useful to us, and how can we apply it to the real world? By uncovering these effects of these factors, we can use this information to do 3 main things. The first is to target the specific needs of countries. The second is to assist in creating intervention programs for humanitarian aid to work with these countries and help them with what they need. And the third is to inspire future research on additional factors related to women's peace and security worldwide. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you learned something. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to the email on this slide. Thank you.